The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon or morning, wherever you're hailing from. Welcome to the National Sourcewater Collaborative's Learning Exchange webinar. My name is Karen Worth, and I am with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's Sourcewater Protection Team and EPA's representative to the Sourcewater Collaborative. And I will be the moderator for today's webinar titled Updates from NRCS and the Northeast, Partnering to Protect Drinking Water. The Sourcewater Collaborative is a group of 29 national organizations that work together as well as individually with their constituents to help policymakers, planners, agriculture interests, developers, citizens group, and other stakeholders to help them integrate source water protection into key decisions. Highlighted in red are the organizations represented or contributed to the planning of today's webinar. In 2016, marking our 10th anniversary, the Sourcewater Collaborative launched the Learning Exchange. The Learning Exchange aims to strengthen the effectiveness of sourcewater protection practitioners across the country by providing a platform to share experiences, transfer knowledge, and learn about funding and technical resources available to support their efforts. The Learning Exchange provides a platform to host and share stories of success that showcase projects and partnerships making a difference in their communities across the country and how others may duplicate these successes. Knowledge sharing events such as webinars like this one and virtual workshops. We also share opportunities to converse with peers through online networking, forums, and social media. Shareable quotes, graphics, and tips to support your organization's operations and outreach efforts, and technical and educational materials developed by or recommended by collaborative members and their organizations and other Learning Exchange participants. The Learning Exchange kicked off in August of 2016, and all of the materials and supporting resources it kicked off in 2016, and these resources are organized by themes that you see here. All of the materials and supporting resources on each of these topics are available on the Sourcewater Collaborative's website at sourcewatercollaborative.org/learning exchange. Over the past 4 years, the Learning Exchange has offered several organized events, communications, and resources by topic area or theme. Building on several of these themes, we are adding new webinars and resources to a few of these pages. Today's webinar and additional resources will be added to the Sourcewater Protection through Conservation Funding Learning Exchange page. We thought it's important to update these resources because in December of 2018, the President signed the Agriculture Improvement Act of 2018, commonly known as the Farm Bill. That date marked the culmination of an extensive and long-term and successful effort by our member, American Water Works Association, to make source water protection a priority within the U.S. Department of Agriculture's conservation programs, and to designate significant funding towards these efforts. Conservation programs spend nearly $6 billion per year on various environmental benefits. And although water quality has explicitly been recognized as a goal of these programs, source water protection recognized as a goal of these programs, source water protection was not an explicit focus. Under the new Farm Bill, 10% of funding on conservation title programs is to be directed to source water protection, providing at least $4 billion over a 10-year period. Conservation programs are meant to assist farmers, ranchers, and forest landowners to protect and enhance environmental outcomes that have benefits both on and off their farm. NRCS is decentralized and organized in each state with a state office, area offices, and multiple field offices, generally one in every county. So to facilitate the successful leveraging of these funds to protect source waters, utilities, states, and other source water stakeholders have the opportunity to work with NRCS state technical committees and local work groups to help discuss and prioritize source water protection needs. During today's webinars, presenters will provide an overview of a few of the NRCS conservation programs and tips on how to establish partnerships to help identify source water priority areas. Participation in today's webinar will also benefit from the experiences of those who are working in this space and learn from their experiences. And lastly, presenters will showcase efforts of drinking water utilities and drinking water programs and conservation groups who are partnering with farming operations and landowners to protect their water supplies through a few of the NRCS conservation programs. Our presenters today are Dee Carlson and Martin Lowenfish from the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service, Headquarters Office in Washington, D.C. Martin and Dee oversee the design and delivery of targeted efforts to deliver USDA conservation programs. Their water quality efforts include the National Water Quality Initiative and the Mississippi River Basin Healthy Watersheds Initiative. Also joining us today is Adam Carpenter from the American Waterworks Association. Adam is with AWWA's Water Policy and Leadership Department in Washington, D.C., serving as an expert and advocate on a diverse set of drinking water issues, including source water protection, the energy water nexus, cyanotoxins, climate change, hydraulic fracturing, consumer confidence reports, and other environmental policy concerns. Along with his colleagues, he works to further AWWA's mission of supporting clean and affordable drinking water through sound application of science into policy, sensible regulation, public awareness, and building stakeholder consensus. And then batting cleanup for us today will be Kyra Jacobs. Kyra has been a water quality scientist with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency since 1997. She works at the EPA's Region 1 office in Boston, which serves all 6 New England states. For the past 19 years, Kyra has worked in the Source Water Protection Program in the Drinking Water Branch. In this position, she works with hundreds of New England water suppliers and communities to help protect their sources of drinking water. Her experience in drinking water protection has given her the opportunity to work on national policy issues related to protecting water supplies nationwide. We will not be taking verbal questions today, but we welcome your questions throughout, and please enter your questions into the question box in the control panel on the webinar. We will answer them as time allows at the end of the presentations. If you would like your question to be directed to a specific panelist, please note that. Please visit the Source Water Collaborative's Learning Exchange webpage to find more details and resources, case studies, and also recording of today and past webinars. And now I'd like to hand it over to Martin Lowenfish and Dee Carlson to get us started.
All right, hi everyone. Thanks for the introduction, Karen. This is Martin Lowenfish. I am branch chief for area-wide planning at NRCS, and all these targeted conservation efforts fall within the purview of at least what we help direct and support from the national office. So I'm going to provide a little bit of background about some of these source water provisions and how NRCS works generally, and then kick it over to Dee, who will provide some more specific information about the delivery of the source water protection guidance and directives from the Farm Bill. So if I could have the next slide. All right, so first, what is in what's in the Farm Bill? So this Farm Bill language is interesting because what it really does is it provides this direction and some tools for NRCS to use to partner with water utilities and a wide variety of stakeholders to target our efforts for source water protection. As Karen mentioned, we have had the authority to do a lot of agricultural conservation that is beneficial for source water for a very long time, but have not had any particular legislative direction that we do so. So there are 3 main directives in the Farm Bill that help us with these with directing conservation for source water. The first is that in each state, the state conservationist, and the state conservationist is the agency's leadership person for NRCS, that the state conservationist should work with partners, including water utilities or those who provide drinking water, to identify priority areas where we can direct funding for source water protection. So this identify local priority areas for drinking water protection in each state. And we will talk a little bit about the particulars about how that needs to be done, or how this will be done in all the states. That we also have now the flexibility to provide additional incentives or a higher cost share rate or payment rate for the assistance that we provide to producers for the conservation that helps to address source water concerns. And then finally, as Karen mentioned, that we are accountable for providing at least 10% of what we call the conservation title program. So those conservation programs that are authorized in the Farm Bill, and specifically in what we call the 85 Act. So those tools that we have are, we have to dedicate a certain portion, 10% at least, of those funds. That 10%, and I would want to emphasize this, that is certainly an accounting mechanism and something that the agency is directed to do. The first two provisions, the idea that we identify important places to work for source water, that we identify the right type of work that needs to be done in all of those source water areas, and with the ability to provide additional incentives to that work, is really quite important operationally, and probably more important for the engagement of our partners than just the 10% accounting, though that 10% accounting is an important measure for us. So next slide here. So I provided that, we talked about the fact that 10% applies to a certain number of programs authorized by the Farm Bill. These conservation title programs exclude something called the Conservation Reserve Program, but does include the Environmental Quality Incentive Program, or EQIP, and the Conservation Stewardship Program, CSP. Both of those are what we might call working lands programs, where we can provide financial and technical assistance directly to agricultural producers. So those are farmers, ranchers, forest landowners, and we can provide them assistance to implement conservation on their agricultural operations. There is also something called the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, or ACEP, by which we can buy easements, work with producers through various mechanisms, including wetland easements, and then also the broad agricultural land easements to what is sort of standard easement work, where the agency working with partners would acquire some basket of rights to agricultural lands. And then finally, the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, which, as the name suggests, is a very partner-directed program. There are annual calls for proposals where partners can propose broad uses of NRCS authorities to develop targeted conservation approaches that will be delivered in partnership between the agency and the partners that make and deliver the proposed projects and selected projects. So next slide, please. All right, and so in implementing these provisions, we've worked closely at the national, state, and local level. And I would just call out here on the slide that, as evidenced by this presentation here and the participants, we are working closely with the Source Water Collaborative and many of the members there. And we called out here certainly EPA Association of State Drinking Water Administrators, and American Water Works Association. This is not obviously a comprehensive list, but we did want to provide some of the key partners that we're working with, and particularly the Source Water Collaborative, which we have to thank for hosting this webinar today. So next slide, please. And then at the state level, and you'll see I've highlighted a couple things. There's this one of the Source Water Collaborative's really informative resources is clipped there. This guide for collaboration to working on protecting source water. So at that state level, certainly we're working with the state drinking water agencies, drinking water utilities, tribes, conservation districts, or SWCDs, soil and water conservation districts, and that there are many mechanisms for collaboration, but we do want to highlight two formal ways that that state level and local level groups and interests can collaborate with NRCS. And the first is this what we call our technical committees, or the state technical advisory committees, and the local work groups. And I'll talk about those in a little more detail below. So I can have the next slide. So NRCS technical committees, or again, the state technical advisory committees, are authorized by law. They work something like a FACA, and they're composed of individuals who represent either themselves or a variety of natural resource, science, and occupations. Members can include other USDA and federal agencies, state agencies, agricultural producers, tribes, nonprofits with conservation expertise, agribusiness, and certainly source water providers or drinking water providers. The STAC advise the state conservationists, and again, the state conservationist is the state level lead for NRCS, on a number of issues, including identifying significant statewide natural resource concerns, technical programmatic recommendations, guidelines for broadly targeting, so ranking and evaluating applications for funding, payment rates, and reporting of conservation program impacts. So this is a venue for engaging with NRCS at the state level, and it is convened and managed by the NRCS state conservationists. And the procedures vary in each state for how to get engaged and when these meetings happen, and what subcommittees and whatnot exist for the state technical committee. So the best venue to get engaged with the state technical committee is through the NRCS state office, which you can find on contact information you can find on the web. All right, next slide, please. So NRCS prides itself, and its foundation is as a locally led conservation organization, and that is embodied in many ways by the local work groups. Local working groups are convened by the local conservation district, and they provide recommendations on these local natural resource priorities and criteria for USDA conservation activities. They help with identifying the needs in the local areas that they cover. These are often based on county lines, but they don't necessarily have to be. They provide recommendations again for ranking and selection and priorities for delivering the financial and technical assistance that NRCS has available. And this is another venue for for drinking water providers to engage with NRCS in identifying priorities for these source water concerns and engaging broadly in the conservation discussions in a local area. All right, next slide, please. All right, and I just did want to highlight again, we scattered through the presentation so far some of the resources that are available from the Source Water Collaborative. And there is a toolkit available on the Source Water Collaborative's website that talks about engaging with the agricultural community and NRCS for getting productive conservation on the ground to meet mutual interests of drinking water providers, agricultural producers, and the broader conservation community. So certainly, you know, in addition to working directly with NRCS, there are resources available to you from the Source Water Collaborative, and they'll help you in engaging with NRCS at the state level. So thank you. And with this, I think maybe I have one more slide. Can I have the next slide, please? All right, and this actually is where I turn it over to Dee. So Dee, why don't you take it away?
All right, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Martin. I'm going to just talk a little bit about what NRCS has been doing so far in source water protection and to comply with the provisions in the Farm Bill, and talk a little bit about where we're headed with source water protection. So first, as Martin mentioned, the elements of the provision. The first thing we did in FY19 was have our state conservationists worked with the drinking water partners in each state to identify the local priority areas that the provisions describe. And we worked with those partners to provide the source water protection area delineations or areas that contribute to sources of drinking water that they would submit for our more focused efforts for source water protection. And we asked that our NRCS staff at least have access to source water protection area assessments or source water area protection plans, or even just groundwater management plans or watershed plans, so that we would have sufficient information to really understand what the threats were to source water, especially those that related to agricultural land use, and so that we would have sufficient information as well to determine what the best suite of conservation practices would be to address those threats, and to help select those locations where we would get the greatest benefit from practice implementation. As Martin mentioned, there was also the opportunity for selecting practices that would have a significant impact in addressing threats to source water. State conservationists also worked with their partners on this and the selection of those practices where they could receive an increased payment rate. And those increased payment rates were for areas where the local priority, for the local priority areas that states submitted. So that's where they were had the opportunity to offer those increased payment practices. And just quickly, just wanted to just go through where we are right now in FY20 as we roll out source water protection focus for this year. I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with our conservation assessment and ranking tool. We have a new ranking tool that we're rolling out this year with NRCS called CART, if you've all heard of it or not. But we provided some opportunities for our states to have flexibility in using that tool to rank source water protection applications in EQIP and CSP, for those conservation programs in a way that would work best for their state. Again, they worked with the partners on outreach and implementation for source water protection within those local priority areas that were identified. So that work is still going on as we roll out for FY20. And guidance was provided for the selection of the priority practices. Again, we were really trying to focus on those practices that had a significant impact in addressing source water threats, and really focusing on those and making sure that they were the appropriate practices to address the threat, and that would also be practices that were amenable to producers for their operation. The local priority areas that were submitted and worked on in FY19 and submitted at the end of FY19 were approved by our leadership in February. And this is just a thumbnail of that map with priority areas, but I think you can see that there was quite a bit of a variety of approaches were taken in identifying the local priorities for each state. Some took a very targeted approach, and others took a broader approach in identifying those areas with partner input. And so we've discussed these priorities with leadership and with our national partners. We've also taken input from state partners, and we decided that for FY21 and moving forward, we'd like to have all states using sort of the same approach for source water priorities. And so just Monday, our bulletin came out that is providing the guidance to our states and how we'd like them to refine their priority areas for FY21. And I guess I want to clarify that we're not asking the states to change the local priorities that they've already submitted. They can continue to use those as needed with partners and in roll out of programs and planning. But we really want the states to use a consistent approach for what we are now going to term high priority areas. And again, the bulletin asked that our state conservationists work with the same drinking water partners that we work with in FY19 and hopefully have been continuing to work with as we roll out source water protection in a more targeted and focused approach, and include other partners that may also be interested in source water protection. So we have some guidance for the states on that approach. And so that includes that these high priority areas shouldn't represent more than 20% of the state land area. We wanted to use a single source database for delineation of these high priority areas. So we're going to use a HUC-12 basis for the selection, and that is for both surface and groundwater protection areas. When states select the HUC-12 for their high priority areas, we're asking that they also provide information on the type of source water and also on what the potential threats are within these high priority areas. We also wanted them to consider the state or utility source water protection delineations that were used originally for the local priority selection back in FY19, and also to consider the EPA source water protection database that's available to the public, and that is data that's aggregated at the HUC-12 scale, but it provides a good representation of the HUC-12s that have the greatest extent of source water protection areas. So that's also a good database for states to use when considering their high priority areas for FY21. The bulletin provides some examples or some guidance for factors that could be considered in selecting those areas. I won't read through these. You can read them for yourself on the slide, but certainly not an exhaustive list. And states are free, of course, to work with their partners to determine the best set of factors for their particular state and for their source water protection areas to select those that rise to the top, I guess, for having the greatest need for a focused, targeted approach. So just to clarify, the local priority areas that were submitted in FY19, we will maintain those coverages and states can continue to use those. In many cases, at least for some states, those are provide a broader extent of where agricultural land use may have an impact to source water, and it should certainly be considered when we're doing any of our planning and implementation for our programs. But it's the high priority areas that we really want to take this targeted, focused approach on for source water protection, for outreach and implementation. These are also the areas, again, that have perhaps an elevated risk or a greater need for a focused effort. And for FY21, these high priority areas will be the areas where states can implement the increased payment rate for those priority practices that can address source water threats. We will be providing a report on the implementation on an annual basis within these high priority areas. We'll be providing that to leadership and to the state so they can have that as sort of a measure of their progress and success in moving forward with source water protection. But as Martin mentioned, we are also required to basically provide an accounting of our investment of our conservation program funds into source water protection. So I just kind of wanted to emphasize or clarify that the targeted approach that we're using to try to make a difference in source water protection areas, especially those that may be at a greater risk or have a greater need, and just the overall tracking of investment in source water protection. So the important work that we're doing in getting conservation on the ground in these targeted areas is, really the important focus of what we're doing, and the targeted approach is what was asked for in that Farm Bill provision. When we're actually doing the tracking for the 10% investment, we will be basing that on all source water protection areas across the U.S., not just within the targeted areas. And so we will be using the EPA source water protection geospatial database as the basis for that tracking. And that is secure data. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but that is the basis that we will be doing. An example of that, I have New Mexico here as an example. On the left are the local priority areas that they all submitted. So New Mexico did take a very targeted approach, and I suspect that these may be the same areas that they submit in FY21 for their high priority areas, except they'll be in a Hub 12 basis. But then on the right-hand side, I've clipped out both the source water and the groundwater EPA source water protection data that's available in the public database. And I'm sure most of you are familiar with this, but just to quickly, the surface water as an example shows all the Hub 12s that have a source water protection area within them. Those that are in yellow have less than 5% of the area of the Hub 12 within a source water protection area. Those that are darkest brown have a majority of the area of the Hub 12 that's within a source water protection area. So it gives us a very good feel for, where we can really maybe focus our efforts and have the greatest impact to source water protection. And you can see visually that New Mexico's local priorities that they chose lined up very well with some of the areas that have higher density of source water protection areas. And so that is really good for the targeted approach that they're using. I think they'll have a really good impact on source water protection. But from those maps on the right, you can see there are also other watershed source water protection areas within the state that we'd like to address with our programs as well. So from a tracking standpoint, we'll not only be focusing on the areas that are targeted by New Mexico here. Again, those are areas that line up well with the EPA database, but also we'll be tracking implementation of our conservation programs on all the source water protection areas in the state, and doing that on a national basis. So quickly, the tracking of the 10%, we are using the EPA national database. This is model data based on either surface water intakes or wellhead locations. And so that data is secure. We don't share that with anyone. We're using it only for analysis purposes. But again, the EPA publicly facing database for that aggregates the information at the HUD 12 scale still provides a very good basis for seeing where those important areas are and where we can be focusing our efforts for targeting. As Martin mentioned earlier, we are tracking this across all of our conservation programs, with the exception of CRP. We are tracking on a contract basis, so identifying all contracts that have a water quality or a water quantity purpose that are addressing either of those resource concerns across our EQIP, CSP, and RCPP programs. And any of those contracts that intersect with the EPA source water protection area database will and we're also looking at the technical assistance funds that go into contract development and contract maintenance as part of that investment that we'll be tracking. And again, the easements, we are tracking that as well as the ASEP program. As Martin mentioned, we are tracking the wetland reserve enhancement, or wetland reserve easements, as well as the agricultural land easements. And again, only selected ALE easements are included that have a water quality benefit. And intersect with EPA source water protection areas in the database will be counted in the 10%. But I did just want to again emphasize that really the on-the-ground work that we're doing through this targeted approach for source water protection is very important. And so we are going to be also tracking what's done specifically in those high priority areas that are selected for progress for our efforts in working with partners for source water protection. And then quickly, I just wanted to mention, Martin discussed our conservation programs, but we do have a few that really do focus on source water protection specifically. The National Water Quality Initiative does have a source water protection component, which provides an opportunity to do some very focused source water protection work with partners for specific projects. And those have a slightly higher level of assessment and focus for metrics that we will look at for progress in those projects. And then quickly, as Martin mentioned, the Regional Conservation Partnership Program has the opportunity for partners to work together specifically for source water protection projects, either at a state or regional level. And if you have any questions, we will be taking those at the end. Please, as Karen mentioned, put all of your questions into the question chat box. And with that, I will turn it over to Adam Carpenter.
All right, good morning or good afternoon, everybody, depending on your time zone. My name is Adam Carpenter. I'm going to be giving part of this this section of the presentation. I'm also going to be presenting with Kyra Jacobs from EPA Region 1, who's works in the drinking water protection program there. Who's going to I'm going to cover kind of a broader scope overview of kind of how we got here and the current focus on source water protection across the programs, and how AWWA, for those of you who are not strongly familiar with AWWA, we're a 501c3 nonprofit for primarily the drinking water sector, but we serve the entire water sector in various different, we have many members who do wastewater reuse, stormwater, and all sorts of other water services. I'm going to give a little bit of a history of kind of how we got to where we are, advocating for source water protection under the Farm Bill and the conservation programs, and then what we're doing to help assist implementation. And then Kyra is going to really focus in strongly on New England and the actions that have been undertaken in that area to help make this a reality. So I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of building partnerships between water utilities and agriculture for source water protection, focused on all the items I just mentioned before. I think we've covered this a little bit already during this webcast, and of course this is the Source Water Collaborative, so I think most people here have a pretty good understanding of what source water is and what source water protection is. But one of the things that we realized during our early conversations on the Hill and early conversations with the NRCS is that we didn't necessarily have a succinct AWWA statement of what exactly is source water protection. So this definition has now shown up in a couple of places, and it's going to be incorporated into the next version of AWWA's G300 source water protection standard, which is AWWA American National Standards Institute co-branded, co-developed standard that that walks utilities through the elements of source water protection plans. And we're absolutely thrilled to have our agricultural partners to help our sector implement our source water protection plans, and to also to help the water utility sector help the agricultural sector meet their conservation goals. So a little bit of quick history of kind of where these provisions came about from. So AWWA, a number of years ago, we were looking, seems like yesterday, but it's, gosh, it's been at least 3, maybe 4 years at this point. We were kind of looking at the past successes and the past challenges, and looking at the congressional calendar, trying to figure out where might be the next opportunity to help the water utility sector, to help protect sources of drinking water, or whatever it may be. And we realized that for years, as Martin had mentioned, for years and years, NRCS had the authorities necessary to do actions that would help protect sources of drinking water through various different conservation programs and all the various different ways that water quality and water quantity related activities are done, but there wasn't any specific focus within NRCS or within the conservation program rules or anything like that. And so we realized, hey, given some of the incidents that occurred around the country that that may have at least some contribution from agriculture. For example, cyanobacterial blooms that are showing up in areas that have a lot of agriculture in the watershed, and some others. Of course, we recognize that all of these incidents have multiple contributions, and that we should be trying to find ways to address all of them. But we realized that, hey, the Farm Bill was coming up, and this might be a place that we could get a little bit of focus and attention on source water protection. So we advocated for these 4 things. They line up quite well with what ended up in the final law, looking to make source water protection a specific goal of the programs, and finding ways to invite utilities to participate on the local committees and be involved in the programs to help inform source water protection needs, which a lot of this these bulletins about creating, local and high priority areas have certainly been very focused on trying to implement that, and make that happen. Another provision, increasing the cost share for measures that help protect sources of drinking water. So that is going to manifest itself primarily through EQIP with up to 90% cost share for measures that help protect source waters in areas that are beneficial source waters. And then last but not least, the 10% that has been talked about, 10% of conservation funding with the exception of the Conservation Reserve funding program on source water protection. So really, with this legislative piece in place, with a lot of the kind of top level administrative pieces completed, what we're looking at now is really towards implementation, right? Which is one of the reasons why we're having this webinar. We're trying to find ways to build awareness across the water sector, not just through events like this one, conferences back when we were having in-person conferences, and hopefully when we're having them again sometime in the future, through one-on-one discussions with AWWA sections and members, and pretty much any partner across the agricultural space, across the watershed protection space, wherever it may be. We're happy to have the conversation and try to find ways that we might be able to help foster some local collaborations on the ground. We've been encouraging AWWA and other utility members to reach out and participate in the state technical committees that we heard a little bit about earlier, build relationships directly with the NRCS offices, the conservation districts, and the others who are often involved in conservation programs. We recognize that as a sector, we are kind of the newcomers, and we're trying to find ways to make sure that our concerns and our needs and our resources, especially to the extent that we're able to offer them, are brought to the table so that we can be meaningful partners and really help contribute to positive outcomes for both for the producers and for drinking water downstream. We've been advocating and doing our best to assist utilities that are interested in relevant programs. So whether that's the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, or we have one that's working on a Conservation Innovation Grant proposal right now. Those who are willing to talk with their state conservationists about potentially being in an NWQI watershed, NWQI source water protection watershed, or to be part of these high priority and local priority designations. So we're trying to find all of the different ways that that people who have issues and have resources can partner and find ways to help deploy them. And of course, the last but certainly not least is run out of our office here in Washington, D.C., finding ways to advocate for incorporating source water protection through all the updates that have to happen as part of the Farm Bill, right? So the programs themselves, through the rules, the guidance documents that come as part of it, the conservation standards, whatever it may be, trying to find ways to make sure that source water protection is incorporated into all those measures in some way, even if it's just an acknowledgement of its importance and ways that you might be able to bring that together. We spent a lot of time trying to find ways to educate the sector. This is one of our earliest pieces. I'll be the first to admit that it's a little bit dated now, but the basic concepts are as strong as ever. We've got a little YouTube video about working together and finding ways to identify the issues and address the issues. What we call a whiteboard sketch. We've never, at AWWA, I'm not sure we've ever had anything that truly went viral in the sense of, the millions and millions of hits, but with thousands of views, we consider that a resounding success, knowing that that most of the people watching are those who are somewhere in one of the two sectors trying to learn a little bit more. We put out a number of different things over the past couple of years. Overview of the programs, with a utility focus, a little quick little cheat sheet of ways to work with the NRCS. There's a new one that we just yesterday, or 2 days ago now, I guess, just finished and are working to find ways to distribute about how to explain what source water protection is for those who may not know, may not be familiar with it. So that's a resource that some of our members reached back to us and told us that was needed for anybody, and kind of anywhere across this whole conservation space. If there are tools and resources that we may be able to develop to help foster these collaborations, we're all ears, and we're certainly willing to give it a shot. These are the key takeaways, not necessarily key takeaways for this entire webinar, but these are the key takeaways that we've been communicating to our sections and communicating to our members kind of over and over and over. Try to get to know your state, area, and district conservationists, the NRCS professionals who are working hard every day to make conservation happen, and really get to know them, make sure they understand your concerns, make sure you understand what you can bring to the table as well. We've been encouraging folks to sign up for the state technical committees, local work groups if that is relevant, makes sense in your area, and not listed on the slide, but in some places there have also been subcommittees dedicated towards source water protection that have been formed. We've seen that in a few states and hopefully growing. So we're encouraging utilities or others interested in these issues to reach out and become part of that. Last, of course, working with their soil and conservation districts, others who have established track records. We know for these types of projects, these aren't ones that the water utilities are likely to be able to go at alone. There have been lots of great models of whether it's RCBP or another program, finding ways to partner with conservation districts and others to make these things happen. And of course, when it makes sense, we're encouraging folks to sign up to apply for one or more of the various programs and make sure that their source water protection needs are heard. And not only, and I just realized in retrospect, I should have modified this, not only AWWA's source water protection page, but also the Source Water Collaborative. Both have an incredible number of materials that are designed to help assist in this and help connect both resources, both utilities and partners to resources. And with that, I'm going to step back and transition over to Kyra to give a little bit of overview of a couple of things that we've done specifically in New England to try to spread the word through a couple of workshops and a couple of other methods. Kyra, take it away.
Thanks, Adam. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kyra Jacobs, or good morning, depending on where you're located. My name is Kyra Jacobs, as everyone has done such a great job laying the groundwork for this webinar. My job is, in my opinion, to inspire you, to give you some ideas, and to serve as a resource, drawing upon the past 9 years of experience that I've had working directly with NRCS staff, as well as all the partners that Adam and Dee and Martin have mentioned in their presentations. So I just wanted to give you an overview of our role at the regional level. And even though the title of my slide here is EPA Region 1 Drinking Water Partnerships with Agriculture, it is certainly representative of many different partners throughout the 6 states that I work in. I've been told my nickname is the source water pollinator or the source water bumblebee. So because I work in a very small region, I have the incredible luxury. If you could just stay on that slide for a moment, Adam. If you think about the fact that our region is so small, I can be in all 6 state capitals within 3 hours. So it does give me an incredible advantage in terms of being able to get to state technical committee meetings in person. And so what I wanted to do was just first thank NRCS. In the past 9 years that I've been working with NRCS staff at headquarters, at the state level, at the county level, it has just been such a learning experience for me, and I am so grateful to all the partners that have taught me so much over the past 9 years. And I wanted to note, just to follow up on what Dee and Martin and Adam were saying, that the state technical committee meetings are really important, and I can't emphasize enough the importance of getting on the mailing list for the state technical committees and trying to participate at the local level if you can. I recognize that we had 220 people on this call currently, and I think we're up to 225 at one point. So there's a lot of different people represented on this call. So what I'd like to do is try to speak to all of you if possible. So you could be a state drinking water program staff, you could be a water utility, you could be a partner, you could be NRCS. So all of you have a different role. And for us in my region, we have just been trying to be really creative for the past 9 years. And as I've noted, we've been able to leverage about $15 million so far to protect drinking water sources in New England. And in aggregate, we receive $60 million approximately among our 6 states. And that means that based on this new 10%, that means that we are able to dedicate about $6 million to drinking water. And Dean, Martin, and Adam really gave you a good, very, very detailed overview. So what I'm going to try to convey to you is how do you take that policy and apply it either locally at the county level. So for us, as you know, the mission of NRCS is helping people help the land. So my mission is to help water suppliers and communities, the hundreds of them that I work with in my region, to protect their source. And I just want to, if you are listening to the presentations and thinking there's so many, vocabulary that you're unfamiliar with, just be patient, because it takes a long time to learn the NRCS programs. You'll hear things like cost share and payment rates, and it can be confusing. But if you're confused, that means that, that you're in good company, because there's a lot of programs that will take you years to learn, but it's worth it because the investment to work with NRCS and their partners is really worthwhile, in my opinion. And it's just been a really great experience so far. So Adam, if you can move to the next slide, please. So I wanted to talk specifically about how we have been working with NRCS. And I'm going to spend some time on this slide talking about some of these projects. So I, as I've mentioned, have, depending on which state I'm working in, we have a different approach. But overall, and this is my recommendation to anyone who's trying to think about where to start, my recommendation is perhaps think by watershed. Now, in our region, it's been easier to work on surface water supplies of drinking water, and most of my presentation will focus on surface water supplies. And I do not want to discount groundwater because, of course, a huge percentage of our drinking water supplies in this country are groundwater. So if you hear me focus on surface water, it's just because there's a larger land area, source water protection areas associated with surface water. So in terms of an entry point, it's been easier to work in a larger watershed or medium-sized watershed to start the conversation with NRCS and the other partners. So as you can see, I've outlined some specific examples. That these aren't all the areas where we're working with NRCS, but I just thought I'd go through some of these so you can understand what does it mean when D is talking about EQIP, the Environmental Quality Incentive Program. So that represents hundreds of conservation practice standards, and it can be very daunting to try to understand those, but NRCS can teach you what those standards mean and how they can be applied. So I'll give you an example. So cover crops, filter strips, nutrient management, how do you manage animal waste in a particular watershed? So for us, the first example I've used is the Merrimack River. So the Merrimack River is a very large source of drinking water in terms of number of people served in my region. And when we started working with NRCS in New Hampshire, one of the ideas we had was NRCS gave a grant to the conservation districts in New Hampshire, so the statewide association, and we held landowner outreach and engagement meetings. And that was really powerful because we were showing the landowners data about potential threats to water quality in the watershed. And we worked our way from the top of the watershed down into Massachusetts. That's, obviously how the river flows in my region. And so that was exciting to be able to work with the landowners and teach them. These are the, we had evening events, a barbecue, and presented NRCS staff, county staff, and state staff presented what the different NRCS programs were, along with the conservation districts, who can often, conservation district staff or soil water conservation district staff are often the first point of contact for a landowner or a producer. So one thing NRCS taught me at the very beginning, for those of you who work in source water protection at the state level or in an official capacity, is that you have to emphasize that we are a non-regulatory program, because sometimes when people think of EPA or states, they think of us as a regulatory agency. So that was one of the first things that NRCS taught me, is to emphasize that we are a non-regulatory program. We are a voluntary program. So the next example I wanted to mention is the Saco River and the Salmon Falls River. The first project we did with NRCS in Maine and New Hampshire was the Salmon Falls River, and it's a smaller watershed than the Saco River. Both rivers are located in Maine and New Hampshire. Salmon Falls divides the state line, and Saco River starts in New Hampshire and flows into Maine and ultimately to the sea. And in the Salmon Falls River, that's really where we learned how to teach each other the language, NRCS and EPA and the state staff. So I mentioned EQIP here. So that's where we really were able to think not just about traditional agriculture. So if you work on a watershed that doesn't have a lot of traditional agriculture, like dairy farms or corn or soybean, you can also think about land protection. So land protection is one of the ways that NRCS taught us that we could, in fact, use their programs. So that's through their conservation activity plans. That's one of their practice standards. Or Dee and Martin mentioned their easement program. So that's going to be really important. And the Salmon Falls River project was so successful that the folks in the neighboring watershed created another source water collaborative called the Saco River Watershed Collaborative. Another example is Connecticut River. That is a regional conservation partnership program project, and I want to highlight that because in that case, the Connecticut Association of Conservation Districts president approached me and some other partners and asked if we would be one of the 3 components of that $10 million RCPP project. So for source water protection, we have $3.25 million dedicated to that project, and there's a match, including match from a lot of different partners. And that's a 5-year project we're just finishing up, and that is land conservation to protect sources of drinking water. The last one is the Farm River National Water Quality Initiative project, and that was really exciting. The state conservationists in Connecticut responded to Dee's bulletin 2 years ago and said, we'd like to do this. We did a call really quickly with the state drinking water staff. The Connecticut Drinking Water Program, Source Water Protection Program, shared their GIS data layer with the state. And Connecticut NRCS state office did a quick analysis of which watersheds would be ideal. And then we approached the utility, the water utility, which was South Central Connecticut Regional Water Authority, which is Greater New Haven's water supply. So it was a really great project partnership that I'm trying to explain to you how some of these come together. It's oftentimes the utility can take the lead, the conservation district can take the lead, or any different partner, a watershed association. So whatever role you personally have, there's a role for you. And the analogy I came up with is it's like a barbecue. I was talking to one of my state NRCS staff, and it's like a potluck barbecue. So we're all bringing something to the barbecue. And so EPA, the source water program doesn't have funds at the regional level, but I have other types of resources. So if you can just think about what you could possibly bring. And then the last thing I'll say about the National Water Quality Initiative is if you can get a seat at the table, an example would be in New Hampshire, the state conservationist pulled us together and had everybody help select the watersheds in person. So as Dee was mentioning, the National Water Quality Initiative has a focus on source water protection. So you can personally help select those watersheds in your state. And that's a really important role that you can have. And so the bulletins, as Dee mentioned, the new bulletin just came out. So it's really important right now to try to get a hold of your NRCS staff if you're not working with the state NRCS folks, and to talk to them about how you can get involved. All right, next slide, please, Adam. And so as an example, as I mentioned, the Salmon Falls Watershed Collaborative, because we were able to demonstrate some innovative uses of NRCS funds, thanks to our NRCS colleagues teaching us about land conservation and forestry, we were very lucky. Deirdre White from the Association of State Drinking Water Administrators nominated our project. And in this photo are 2 state conservationists from Maine and New Hampshire, myself, 2 state drinking water programs from New Hampshire and Maine, and some NGO partners. And I just think it demonstrates this barbecue. We're a little dressed up for a barbecue in this photo, but the point is that we all bring something different to the table, and together we can achieve great things. Next slide, please. So last summer, Tracy Meehan from the American Water Works Association and Adam Carpenter approached me and asked if we would think about hosting some Farm Bill and source water protection meetings in in our region. So we put our heads together, we worked with our local chapter, the New England Water Works Association. Some of you might recognize in the bottom photo, Chi-Ho Sham was on the planning team and one of the facilitators. So what we did was we decided to do it the first meeting in the 3 southern New England states because they're a little more urbanized and have different agricultural needs than our northern New England states. And we had speakers from the state drinking water program. In the top picture, myself, there's a representative from one of the water utilities, the state conservationist from Connecticut, and we had this panel in the bottom photo with NRCS, with myself, and with the Forest Service. We had our partner, Carl Honkinen from the Forest Service, did a great presentation on how to work with the Forest Service on source water protection. Next slide, please. So I want to emphasize that source water protection, NRCS, Farm Bill, this is an art, not a science. And in the bottom photo, you can see we had about 50 people attend that first meeting. And I told the water utility folks, trying to teach you about NRCS programs in one day is like trying to teach NRCS staff how to run a water treatment plant in one day. It just simply isn't possible. But what we can do is start the conversation. And for the folks that are on this webinar, this is, if you're new to the nomenclature of NRCS, it's, it'll take a lot of time, but as I mentioned previously, when we have meetings like this, and part of my goal here is to encourage you and to inspire you to perhaps host a meeting in your own state or your own county. So you can see the goals, highlight how the partners have worked with NRCS to promote source water, provide a roadmap, and educate water suppliers about the NRCS programs. And we went through some of the projects that I just described to you in detail from all the different states. And in the upper photo is Providence Water, and we also had Northern Rhode Island Conservation District as a speaker. Next slide, please. We were going to have our second meeting in March of 2020. It was planned around the retirement date of the New Hampshire State Conservationist, Rick Ellsmore, who I've been working with for the past 9 years and has been such a great ally for us. And unfortunately, it was scheduled for March 19th, and we just missed our window. So we had to postpone it due to COVID. However, New Hampshire NRCS had a great idea. The state staff suggested that we have a smaller group meet virtually. So we held a 90-minute webinar in lieu of that meeting. And I have a photo of some famous farmers from the city where we were supposed to hold the meeting. Cy Robertson from Bohannon Dairy was going to talk to us about how the work they're doing on their farm is helping to protect the city of Concord, New Hampshire's water supply. So we plan to do that meeting in person at some point in the future. We don't know when, but I was really excited that we had an excellent discussion on that call with, we had everyone except the utilities. We had one presentation by Portland Water District to give us the utility perspective, but we decided to hold off on including the utilities until we could all be together in person. And next slide, please, Adam. So I just want to include the goals. I won't go through all of these, but we wanted to talk to the state conservationists in great detail about how that bulletin, how we were able to implement what Dee described from last year. All the states had a different approach to implementing the bulletin, and we want to share ideas. Just today, I received a draft from New Hampshire NRCS that created a fact sheet for source water protection for NRCS in their state, which we think will be a great model for the rest of the states. And to just have some cross-pollination. I'm just so fortunate to work with such amazing NRCS colleagues in every state in my region, and farmers, producers, landowners, and the partnership has been tremendous. And I really want to help teach all of you how to do similar work in your region or your state. And my contact information is on my final slide, Adam, if you want to advance. So I know there are 203 people on the call right now, and I might, it might be a little bit crazy, but I really do welcome your calls or your emails. I love talking about our work with NRCS. It's just so inspiring to me. And so I want to share what I've learned, because it can be challenging, but it's so worth the effort to create these partnerships and to work with your colleagues. And I'm just so proud to work with my federal NRCS colleagues and all the other partners that have been mentioned on this call. And I will stop there so we can turn it over to questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. I am, let's see here, I'm going to try to pop my slides back up here. Hopefully you guys can see this. I want to thank Martin for mentioning the Source Water Collaborative's Conservation Toolkit. So I just wanted to, it's sometimes a little difficult to find. So if you go to our homepage on the sourcewatercollaborative.org and you see Connect with Others, if you select that, and then go to the conservationists, that will take you to the toolkit, and you can see here is the working with NRCS, and that will take you to the toolkit. So that's another resource. It's also linked from the Learning Exchange page, but I did want to make sure folks could find that, because it is sometimes a little tricky to find. So with that, I'm going to remind everybody to go ahead and type your questions into the question box. And if our panel can all unmute yourselves, I already have a number of questions that are in, so if I can go ahead and get started. So the first question is for Martin. And the questioner asks, it says, I may have missed this, but was the NRCS State Technical Advisory Committee, was that also formed, as a result of the 2018 Farm Bill?
No, and I should know the reference, but it is a long-term feature of NRCS and the way we've delivered conservation. I'm tempted to say it dates back to our founding in the 30s, but it may not have gone back in that name, but certainly in that spirit. It's gone as long as we've been in an agency.
Great, thanks, Martin. And the next question is, do you have any idea when the county offices are going to be open and when the technical committees will begin meeting again?
The agency is going through phased reopening. There are opportunities to interact virtually with offices on a state by state and county by county basis. I don't have all the details on that, though I can probably get a resource for that, like an office finder. I know it's a lot of information to juggle. There are, certainly for our producers, so our customers, we're working with a lot of folks virtually, signing up people for contracts, and we appear to be on track to entering into as many contracts and doing as many, having as many interactions, albeit not face-to-face with producers this year as any year. So we are doing business, and I'll see if I can find a resource that can be distributed about how to get in touch with NRCS now.
Karen, can I follow up to that?
Sure.
Hi, this is Kyra Jacobs. I just want to mention that I've been on multiple state technical committee meeting calls. Some of them have had to go virtual because of the current situation. So don't let that deter you. They're still happening. As Martin said, the work is just having to be moved to a virtual format. And of course, we'd rather be meeting in person and having the networking opportunities at state technical committee meetings, but still pursue being invited to those meetings so you can receive the invitations even if they're happening virtually. That's my recommendation.
Thanks, Martin and Kyra. The next question is there any good examples of reaching out to state hazard mitigation officers to make connection with communities that have flood hazards and water quality source water protection concerns to help leverage FEMA funds or coordinate on planning efforts?
You want me to take that, Karen?
Sure.
So again, this is Kyra. My response is not related to our work with NRCS. In my region, I see it as a separate conversation. We do work with hazard mitigation officers in our states, and we've done source water protection workshops with planning agencies. So I would recommend that, I don't know who asked the question, Karen, but it's, for me, it can be connected. You know, NRCS can help with flood mitigation, but connecting FEMA dollars and NRCS dollars can be challenging because they're both federal funds, of course.
Yeah, this is Adam. At least for RCPP, and I'm not sure on the rules for all the other programs, it is possible to combine dollars from other federal agencies as long as the other federal agency is also okay with it. It is not okay to combine two different USDA agency sets of funds. But it is case by case. We do have a few examples of projects that used 319 funding from EPA as part of their partner contributions for RCPPs. I'm not sure. We don't have any that I'm aware of with FEMA, though.
Great. Thanks, guys. Next question is, can utilities revisit the source areas delineated by the state conservationists last year if they thought there are better priorities?
So this is Martin, and yes, the bulletin that just went out does, you know, it focuses, and our presentation focused it on delineating those high priority areas, but we also reminded folks that they can update their local priority areas as well. So the same work that you did last year is something that can be revised working with your state conservationists.
Thanks, Martin. The next question is, will states have access to the areas identified by NRCS that overlap source water protection areas with lands NRCS has oversight for? This would be helpful in identifying priority areas for the states.
Well, and I think this is clear, but it's worth mentioning that NRCS is not a land management agency, and so I'm going to start with those real basics. So we don't manage any lands, and we are non-regulatory. So we work with private landowners, and we can provide assistance for just about on any private agricultural land. So the best way to look at those overlaps between, you know, the areas that you as a utility or water quality source water agency have is to look at where the agricultural lands are.
Great, thanks, Martin. And another question, will NRCS provide feedback to the states where protection activities have been funded, either spatially or a list of public water systems and associated activities?
Can you repeat that question again?
Sure. Will NRCS provide feedback to the states where protection activities have been funded, either providing the data either spatially or a list of public water systems and the associated activities with, you know? So I think what the question is getting at, I hope, is that they're curious if there's a way that a state can get a copy of those that crossover area where investments have been done in source water protection areas.
Right. Well, we I think probably not as directly as you're asking. We are finalizing our analysis and the analysis methodology for to look at that accounting. But so we'll provide feedback to to our states and the public about what funding we're identifying as having counting towards meet this requirement, and so that's certainly possible. But we, as many of you probably know, or certainly the way that we're looking at it is that very few conservation activities have a single purpose. So there's nothing that we would identify as having a solely source water purpose. We look at resource concerns as protecting, addressing water quality, either for surface water or for groundwater. And if that falls into a source water area and addresses a concern that's been identified as a concern for that, we will count that as source water protection. And indeed, it does have that source water protection benefit. But we aren't, on a national basis, identifying particular contracts as source water contracts. Hopefully that addresses the question. But I guess it goes back to that that basic premise that most conservation has multiple resource benefits, and so something like nutrient management is done for many purposes and has the benefit of keeping excess nutrients from running off into surface waters or excess nutrients infiltrating into groundwater.
Karen, can I add a follow-up to what Martin said?
Sure.
Martin, I think it's also important to note that, of course, you're constrained as an agency by confidentiality. So I just want to make sure that people on the call realize that NRCS would not be able to release the details of those contracts or the names of the producers who have received the money from NRCS because that's confidential. So I think it would be hard for you to provide what the person posing the question is asking, from what the way I understand it.
Yeah, thank you, Kyra, for that. As Kyra provided, by law, NRCS is prohibited, or USDA is prohibited from providing individual producer data about their operations. It's rather than using the specific language of the Farm Bill or otherwise, it's a little bit like HIPAA. Like when you sign that note at the doctor's office, we are prohibited from sharing information about the assistance, other than the straight up financial assistance, but as the particulars of what conservation went where for what producers is protected by law, and we are prohibited from disclosing that. We can give information out in the aggregate, which is why we can say, well, how much conservation of particular types has gone to a state or is in a large or small watershed within certain constraints. But yeah, we can't take it generally back to the producer or piece of land.
Thanks. And then I have another question. This one relates specifically to forest producers. And it said, I'm hearing a lot of agricultural terms like producer and agriculture practices. Can NRCS please clarify whether forest producers and forest landowners are eligible and considered?
Yes. I'll start with that very short answer. Yes, we have assistance available for forest landowners. They have to meet a lot of the general eligibility tests, like being actively engaged. But if they are produce some income as one of the tests to count as broadly as a producer, which is a very generic term for someone engaged in a degree of agricultural activity. Yes, forest, we do a lot of assistance for in the forestry realm and work with forest landowners all across the country.
Great.
Karen, it's Kyra. I'd be happy to talk to anyone further about that because that's sort of been our area of expertise in my region. So I'd be happy to follow up with anyone on that specifically.
Great, thanks, Kyra. Will water utilities be able to request their own data for their watershed from EPA's secure database to see if it agrees with their critical areas from where for their local knowledge? And I think if it's okay with all of you, I'll go ahead and tackle that question. Again, the modeled source water protection areas are just how the states or how NRCS is going to be accounting for the 10% investment so that it is a consistent methodology across all of the states where I would encourage the water utilities, if you have your own data for your watersheds, that would be something that you could bring to the discussion through this process that they're going through to identify high priority areas. So if you have more refined or granular information, that would certainly bring value. But right now, EPA is not sharing publicly the secure data just because we are, after 9/11, it was considered sensitive data. And so we maintain the security. Some states do make it publicly available, their actual source water protection areas, but because not all of them do, we maintain it as sensitive or secure at the national level. Anything else anybody wants to add to that? Great. So another question, when delineating high priority areas, why are HUCs required to be the standard base? This works well for surface water, but does not line up with groundwater based systems. We are currently using modeled wellhead protection areas for groundwater-based systems and having good success. Intersecting wellhead protection areas with HUCs messes up about 10% and will not allow for the wellhead protection areas to be included.
Let's see, so this is Martin. I will defer to Dee to help flesh this out. And I would say, one, that we recognize that this is not a perfect solution, particularly for groundwater, but it does help us address two nationwide concerns. And one is that it allows us to create a publicly shareable product where we can use the HUC 12s as a basis for a map that doesn't compromise the protected nature of the actual source water areas. So that's one of the basic. The other is internal, just helps us manage a good quality product. That we do recognize that there are shortcomings for that approach to groundwater. So Dee, do you have anything that you want to add to that?
Not specifically, Martin. We did have this discussion, extensive discussion with partners on this, especially EPA, on the use of the HUC 12. And so again, it's not an ideal solution, but it provides some consistency because a lot of the delineations we received for FY19 for those local priorities were very difficult to do analysis on because there was significant overlapping. And I guess I would just emphasize that even though this is will define the high priority area for our program rollout, we still expect that our planners and working with partners that we continue to identify and focus on those areas within the HUC 12 that have the greatest need for treatment. And so focusing on the specific delineated groundwater or wellhead protection area in that case is what we would want to be doing. That's the approach that we want to take, even though the it would be delineated on HUC 12, and that's the kind of the public-facing map that would show. Our efforts would still be focused in that wellhead protection area.
Yeah, and this is Karen Worth. Just also to provide a little bit of clarity in the secure data that we provided to NRCS for the accounting purposes, the wellhead areas are primarily at the catchment level. So those catchment areas for recharge. So they're a little bit more refined than the source water protection areas. Let's see. Whoops, hold on, I know we have more questions here. Let me get down. Is there a database available to the public that covers what HUC 12 watersheds include source water protection areas? So I think I can answer that. The underlying data to the data that we provide, EPA provided to NRCS, as we mentioned, is secure, but there is on the EPA drinking water mapping application to protect source water, or DW maps. There is a publicly available, as I think Dee mentioned in her presentation, there is a publicly available what we call density layer, and it will show all the HUC 12 watersheds and provide information on the density of that HUC 12 that is covered by a source water protection area. So if you remember Dee's example of New Mexico, the darker the color of that HUC 12, the higher the percentage of that HUC 12 is covered by a source water protection area. So it's not as granular as the specifics of where in that HUC 12 is an actual source water protection area, but you can get a pretty good estimate of if it's 0 or less than 5%, or as high as 90 to 100%. So I would encourage people to go to that, and that is on EPA's website. If you go to epa.gov/sourcewater protection, it is, and actually if you just Google EPA DWMAPS, all caps, it will take you right there. So, is a formal watershed-based plan required in a source water protection area in order for producers to be eligible for the, for the greater cost share benefit?
All right, I think you were asking how it is that producers are eligible for the greater cost share benefit.
I think so, Martin.
Okay. And
I think the question is there a formal, do they need a formal watershed-based plan in order to be eligible for either investment or increased cost share?
No, there is not that requirement. Now that's something that is similar to, it sounds like the National Water Quality Initiative, where in that case, in order for a watershed to be designated for the National Water Quality Initiative, there has to be a watershed assessment. And what that does is make additional funding broadly available in a designated area, usually a watershed. But for this additional or this higher payment rate, the there doesn't have to be this watershed designation or the watershed assessment. It has to be one of these high priority areas as Dee described. And then the availability of the payment rates for source water practices in particular areas is communicated through our normal advertisement process. So when we make funding available for producers, NRCS is obligated to advertise that on the website and communicate with producers on the local level, saying, hey, this is when signups will close. We take signups on a regular basis, but we need to publish the payment rates and things like that and make them available to the public. This all varies by the state and local level, but there are requirements that we make that we do that advertisement.
Great. Thanks, Martin. And unfortunately, we do have a lot more questions, but unfortunately, we don't have a lot more time. So we're already a few minutes over. So I thank everybody for your participation, and I will try to spend some time on these questions and see if I can't answer a few of them. But with that, I'll thank everybody again for participating and remind everybody that this recording will be available on the Source Water Collaborative's website in the next few days under the Learning Exchange. So thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.